Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and thanks to those who just arrived. I'm Dawud Potgieter. I'm the Director for Programs and Discovery Science at Templeton World Charity Foundation, and I lead the Accelerating Research on Consciousness initiative. I'm delighted to be joined here with my colleague, Virginia Cooper, who works with me on this initiative. We're doing a joint webinar today because my wife and son both have COVID, which means I may have run out at some point. If that happens, Virginia will take over. She's probably better at answering many of the questions than I am. So yeah, we'll kind of do it together in that sense. If you have questions already, the best thing to do is just pop them in the Q&A section. I hope that many of the overall number of questions one might have were already in the instructions, but we appreciate there are some questions we can't see coming, and so hopefully this is a useful time to answer these. I see Virginia's also answering some just in text as we go along. So thanks for doing that, Virginia. I'll get started with a brief presentation, just recognizing that some people may have watched the first webinar a long time ago. Some may not have watched it. So I'm going to do maybe sort of 10 minutes, something like that, just to kind of remind everybody what we're talking about here. And then we could jump into live Q&A. If we do Q&A for the rest of the hour, great. Could be a fantastic conversation. If everything's answered quickly and we run out of things to talk about, then we will finish early and give you back some time. So just quickly pop here in the chat. Let's start with the presentation. So you've all probably seen this. This is the web page for the Accelerating Research on Consciousness RFP. As you know, we hope to fund up to 15 projects, and it comes from the basis of our other research on consciousness, which is mostly adversarial collaboration. This isn't necessarily adversarial collaboration. It could be broader. It could be a much broader range of proposals, but we are still very keen to get high quality scientific research. So very briefly, we are looking for research with a broad understanding of the current academic literature on consciousness. We want to encourage people to integrate or contrast more than one tool, method, or theoretical approach. Again, I didn't mention specifically neuroscience literature. We could be thinking about psychology or related academic fields, but it needs to be scholarly, academic literature. We need some of the project funds to contribute towards scientific research, and the project description needs to feature key experimental research questions, or at least one key research question. We encourage applicants to contextualize their research questions within a rigorous conceptual framework, and that means a clear operating definition of consciousness should be included in the project description and should be consistent throughout the project. We're not going to tell you how you should define consciousness, but there should be at least some sense of what you mean by it, so that we can understand what the implications of the project might be. All finalists will have to pre-register their project descriptions on the Open Science Framework before a award can be made. And we just assume that by submitting a proposal, applicants agree to do this as required. That doesn't mean you have to submit your project description as a pre-registration immediately, but you need to be prepared to do that. And we ask all applicants to exclude their names and affiliations from the project description document, because we intend for the external review process to be double-blind, but we won't have the capacity to go and anonymize all the documents once submitted, especially because these are PDFs. We will go and read them, so we will look for it, and if you haven't anonymized it, then we can't guarantee that you will go through to the external review stage. So it's up to you to make sure you can do that, but obviously we can't go and anonymize a PDF. So very broadly speaking, that is what we're looking for. I'm going to quickly run through the stages of this RFP. Here's my test application. This is what the portal looks like. I assume if you're at this webinar, then you've already gone to the application portal. You've probably looked at these different sections. And just to kind of give you a general overview, the description and budgets probably requires the most work. Outputs and outcomes are essentially what you will produce and what kind of impact can be measured from that. So an example would be, we will produce a paper, and the impact would be, it will be, we expect such a number of citations or something like that. And then our basic sort of compliance information, which organizations will be involved, who will the team members be. So I have some slides on the project description and the budget, just getting back there, because the project description is the only part that will be sent to external reviewers. We will review the entire application, but we're going to ask reviewers to specifically do an external review on the quality of the project description. So there we want the hypothesis and specific aims to be stated, information about the significance, background, research strategy. I'm just running over these because I've done them in more detail in my other webinar, and this is also written and explained more on our website. There are some important other guidance and criteria. So to keep things anonymous, if you cite your previous work, please avoid phrasing it as your work. We also ask you to please define and explain technical terms when they first occur, especially which ones are used with like a specific meaning within the proposal. Essentially, we love to encourage interdisciplinary research, and that means we're expecting a reasonable range of academic disciplines to be represented among the applicants and the reviewers. We work very hard to make sure that a reviewer understands your area of expertise, but it's important to just not get too technical within a subfield, because that might just be confusing to them. And then finally, the length, expected length is about 2,000 words, maximum length about 3,000. We're not always that strict on the length, but I mean, be mindful that if it's very, very, very long, then a reviewer is probably going to get the impression that you don't know how to be concise. So that sort of could be an issue. The budget is a spreadsheet, and I've just kind of like copied and pasted some bits out of the spreadsheet because I want to give you an idea of what the budget categories are like. I assume most people here have looked at them, but just very briefly, there's a line on all the project personnel, one on classroom teaching, which for most people here that's likely to be 0, but for compliance purposes we have to ask about that. Operational research costs, that'll be sort of lab equipment, that kind of thing. Travel and lodging is split into 2 lines. Again, this is for compliance purposes. Anyone employed by your legal organization will go here in line 4. Everybody else will go in line 5. And there is a limitation here that for line 5, the limitation is 10% of the total sort of direct costs that we can spend on that. In terms of additional funding, this box here basically tags on to this box at the top. So wherever you have additional funding, you could add your co-funding, and that could be seen as a useful thing. And again, we don't have restrictions on the amounts of co-funding. So if you want to have travel and lodging for other people at other organizations to come visit, but it's co-funding, you get the money from somewhere else, put it in there, that's fine. So Stage 2 is about to start soon. This is when the RFP closes and we start looking at your proposals. We'll do an internal review and completeness check. That means we want to make sure your profile is completed, description and budget sections are all completed with the correct attachments, all the rules have been followed. We expect at least one entry for the output section, one entry for the outcome section, same for organizations, and we need at least one team member with their CV, but of course you could add more team members there. We need all your supporting materials, and we also need, please, when you've completed your proposal, go to the bottom and click the submission and confirm button. By just completing the things and uploading stuff, it doesn't get submitted. In order to submit it, please remember, go to the bottom and click the complete, completed and confirmed button. Otherwise, we might not know that you wanted to submit it, or we might think that you ran out of steam at the last minute and didn't really want to submit it. And if that happens for too many proposals, we just don't have the capacity to take them all in. So if you want to give your proposal the best chance, remember to click that button at the end. External review is worth kind of highlighting again. We will go over background and rationale, study design, objective, significance, and relevance. Please note that the study design and objectives is weighted sort of more heavily than the others. And our scoring guidelines are it's essentially sort of kind of like a Likert scale guide, where we ask reviewers to just sort of comment on the different aspects of the proposal. In this case, the reviewers may add some feedback, but we don't necessarily ask them to add actionable feedback, but we give them specific things to score the proposals on. Something unique or fairly unique about our stage 3 down selection is this partial lottery. So as many of you may have heard that the external reviews in any round is rarely something that fully captures and appreciates the value of every proposal. And as some other organizations have done, we're doing this as a trial where the top proposals get an element of randomness in the selection to account for the fact that the external review scores are not, will never be fully accurate. So essentially, proposals below the median will be rejected. Proposals above the median will get a random selection. And what that means for you, as I would encourage you to do, is don't submit a proposal just that you think the external reviewers would put into the top 5%. That's not necessary. Submit what you think is the best and most impactful research for the field. And so hopefully, instead of spending lots and lots of time to kind of figure out exactly how the reviewers would be the least likely to criticize something, we hope that this could allow you to pitch something that's a bit more risky. If your score's above the median, you have the same chance as everybody else. So the last stage would be pre-registration. So only by the time a proposal gets to this point, it would have been narrowed down to the point where we have 15 or fewer proposals. So everything there would be eligible to be considered for funding. And at this point, we would require people to pre-register. We recommend the Open Science Framework, and we're happy with either hypothesis testing or exploratory research pre-registration. So if you're familiar with pre-registration and you want to do either of those, it's fine. If you're not familiar with it, then it's probably not that much of an important detail. But we will, at the time of pre-registration, also run a webinar to help walk you through the process. So if you're happy to pre-register, you're happy to write out your project description and put it on there, you're not 100% sure how to do the technical things on the OSF website, don't worry, we can help you when it gets there. At this point, there will also be an opportunity if we have received review or feedback. We don't enforce it, but we would encourage it and allow it. So at this point, you could get feedback to strengthen your proposal. And then the proposals will go to the trustees of the foundation. So I can't make the funding decision. I just present a batch of proposals. But at this point, we will present a batch that we have full funding for, and that means it's possible for everything to be funded. There's no more competition at this stage. So quickly, just reminder of the timeline. The submission deadline is January 28th, so it's fairly soon, 10 days. We expect to announce the finalists by March 22nd, so that would be the beginning of stage 4. And we expect for a decision to be made so that we can announce the awards by June 6th. Your earliest start date is August 6th because we need to allow a couple of months for contract negotiation, and project duration could be 12 to 24 months. We also have a email address there that you can contact if you have further questions, although now's probably the best time to ask your questions. So let's hop into Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, here it says the website says 12 days left to submit. I don't know. Is that the portal website, the application portal? We're happy with whatever it says on the website. So I won't, if the website gives you a more generous deadline, I won't cut it off. I'll just have to go and look into it. So yeah, if the website says that and I've made a mistake, I apologize. Go, by all means, go with what the website says. And I'll just kind of make a note here. We'll look into that, but if the website has kind of given you that time, I won't take it back. Great, so we've got about 11 questions here. I'm going to jump into them. I hope I know the answer to all of them. Something I'll say is that if it's technical details that are in the application, you're still probably better off looking at those. But let's get started here. So the first question is, can the questions posed in the chat and the responses be made available after the webinar? The answer is this webinar is recorded, so I will read them out and talk about it, and they'll be made responses, be made available in that sense. Hopefully that answers the question. If the question is whether they'll be written up, then I don't think we'll have time to do that in 10 days. Well, I mean, could do it in 10 days, but it's easier to just watch the webinar. Next question is, can we propose a main experiment which will be pre-registered, but also a non-pre-registered supplementary study? In our case, we're thinking of a small supplementary study that will bring interesting results, but would only make sense if we get one specific result from the main study. The answer is yes, you can do that. In fact, for those, you could, in principle, do a pre-registration of both studies, and then you can just, conduct a second study or not. Or you could do it like a staged registration. But yes, providing there is a competitive study that's been pre-registered, you would meet the minimum criteria. Next question, does the proposal have to be focused on theoretical aspects? For example, in one project, we use patients to test a theoretical framework. And should I not include any potential clinical application? So I think the question here is trying to get to whether it's okay to just have something clinical, or whether you also have to address something to do with the literature in consciousness. I think in our context, if it's purely clinical, it would be seen as less competitive, because we want to understand something about the nature of consciousness. If you can do something clinical that also gives some theoretical insights, fine. But at the very least, we need to have something that is sort of an acceptable operating definition of consciousness, and it needs to the study needs to relate to that definition. So clinical research is okay, it's accepted, but your proposal would be in the strongest possible form if you also can point to some way that it would increase our broader understanding of the nature of consciousness. I'm seeing something pop here in the chat. I can get to the chat later, but I'm gonna encourage people to pop their questions in the Q&A, because otherwise I'll just get confused between the two. So another question here: although applications will be anonymized, experimental data for our application will depend on the fact that one of us has access to clinical data at a major hospital. We think this is a strength of our proposal. References may also clearly point to who the PIs might be. Is this acceptable, or should we specifically hide institutional names? I appreciate it's impossible to completely anonymize absolutely everything. So I think if you make a reasonable effort, that's good enough. I mean, if a reviewer is really savvy and really keen, and they absolutely dig into a proposal, they could probably get a very good guess of who that is. So I'm not asking you to go to that level and make everything completely sort of unidentifiable, and that might also make it difficult for them to understand what you're talking about, or what certain kinds of background research has been done. But I think if there's a good, reasonable effort, you're not name dropping or saying we're all this institution kind of thing, then I think it should be fine. Next questions, please identify some examples of outcomes and outputs. That's a good question. People often ask about this. So for us, an output is a product that's delivered. That could be a paper, it could be a book, it could be a meeting, it could be a conference presentation or a poster session, or a seminar. The outcome is something tangible to describe what it achieves. So for papers, it will be citations. For books, it could be copies sold. For webinars, it could be number of attendees. For conference presentations, it could be number of attendees. So I think those are probably the most relevant examples in this context. Next question: are reviewers blind to the entire team or only to the applicant? So in this case, the reviewers will only receive the project description. So they won't receive other information about the team. We will vet that, but they won't receive other information. So in that sense, yeah, they are blind to the entire team, unless if you go and list your team in there, but you're not supposed to do that. So keep their information out of it. Here's a question that I see Virginia is answering. So, but I can quickly talk about it and say it is possible to disperse funds in different years, but that tends to come at the contract negotiation stage. So I'm going to hop to the next question. Is additional funding a requirement, or does it give an advantage? The answer is it is not a requirement, and it wouldn't necessarily give an advantage, but it could, in the sense that if you have a more ambitious study that could accomplish more, and you already have co-funding for it, then it will probably review better. So in that sense, it could give an advantage, but that's kind of indirect. It's not a specific requirement. And frankly, if you don't have additional funding, but you've got a good experiment that you can carry out with the current funding you have, focus on that. Don't worry about like trying to fudge in some additional funding. Next question. It looks like we can submit the proposal online without OSP involvement. I assume that by OSP you mean Office of Sponsored Programs, which is the sort of the office at some universities that have to sign off on proposals. The answer is yes, you can submit without OSP involvement. They will be involved in sort of stage 4. But our goal here is to let anyone pitch an idea without too much bureaucracy or too much hassle. We can bring them in later on. Obviously, you need to have confidence that they'd be okay with it. Don't want to submit something that your university would hate, but you don't need to worry about that right now. I see we are firing through these questions. Another 11. So let's keep going. These are good questions, by the way. So please keep them coming. Next question here. If some mistake is made in budgeting or some other way in which the application does not meet the foundation standards, will the foundation return the application to fix this? So I think it depends on the mistake. If it's something that's sort of very minor and kind of inconsequential for the application, we would probably just come back to it in stage 4. If it's substantial, then I don't think we will. I think it would just be a decline. The reason being that we expect to have quite a large volume of applications. And if we include a step where we go back and fix mistakes, we just have to budget in a lot more time for everyone. Because then we depend on the institutions and kind of different back and forths. And that would basically stop us from being able to do this kind of as quickly as we can and in the nimble way that we're trying to do it. So my recommendation would be there to make sure you answer all of the questions. And the portal should force you to do everything right, but also read the instructions carefully and make sure you've done that. Next question here is, what is the difference between finalists and final award? The finalists are already people after peer review. Yes is the answer. Finalists are the people after the peer review stage. So this is a very good question. Essentially what happens is all of our proposals need to be considered by the Board of Trustees who give the final approval. So we have to have that step. I can't just kind of take a cut, do the randomization, and then give the money. So what we're doing instead is we get to the point where we have finalists. That is to say, proposals that have been reviewed, have been selected as the finalists, and would be no more than 15. So that means we have enough money to fund all finalists. By the time there's a finalist, there is enough money to fund all of it, no more competition. The last thing to do is then to just take it to the foundation's Board of Trustees. Now, generally speaking, those will get funded. It happens very occasionally, very rarely, that the board spots something that we've missed. They might spot a reason not to fund it. So we want to be upfront about that. We can't guarantee that all finalists would be funded, but it's very rare that kind of thing becomes an issue. Most of the time, a proposal that gets to that point will be accepted. So that's why we're trying to essentially minimize the amount of work until you get to that stage, and that's when we say, okay, now you've got to pre-register. It might also be that someone gets to being a finalist and then they decide they don't want to pre-register, in which case they'll be disqualified. So how does the random aspect of selection work? Do all proposals that initially score above the medium have the same random chance? The answer is yes. So it's what's called a partial lottery. it's been tried a few times. Carl Bergstrom and Kevin Gross wrote about this a few years ago. It's been tried in New Zealand, possibly in the UK. And the idea is sort of, well, twofold. One is that the amount of effort that anyone requires to get into the top 90% is often a lot more time. And so it's much more difficult to do quick rounds of funding, quick RFPs. You need much longer lead time, much more institutional involvement. And the second thought is that very often, and this is sort of slightly anecdotal here, but external reviews don't always align perfectly. There's quite a bit of variation in reviewer scores, and I'm sure as many have experienced, sometimes a proposal that seems promising could be could be scored down by something like an unlucky review, and we don't want people to kind of feel too worried about that. We want this kind of RFP to encourage risk taking, pitch the proposal that you think is the best, rather than pitch the thing that's going to get the least criticism from reviewers. So the likelihood of being funded is not going to change. We can't change that. The only thing we can do is sort of be honest about the fact that there's so much variation in the external review. It's impossible to say with perfect accuracy which are the best proposals. So what we're trying to do here is just account for that to reduce the burden of what could be sort of unhelpful incentives in a normal RFP process. Next question here. Does the institution have to write a supporting letter which will be submitted together with the rest of the material? That's a good question. In our normal proposals, that is not necessary, and I'm tempted to say it's not necessary here. I would say go and look at the materials section, and I'm sorry for not knowing the exact answer to that. I should. If it's not in there, then it's not necessary. I'm pretty sure it's not necessary, but go and look at that. And it's kind of embarrassing that I don't know the answer to that. But sorry.
Not necessary, Dawood.
Oh, Virginia has checked it. Thanks, Virginia. You've rescued me there. Great, not necessary. That's cool. Oh, interesting question here. Would proposals in the area of philosophy of mind be considered? The answer is yes. So, we often fund philosophy projects. An important caveat here, sort of yes, but a proposal relating to philosophy of mind, in this case, needs to also have an experimental component. So it might be that based on some of the literature of philosophy of mind, one could make a prediction, and you want a proposal to essentially flesh out that theory and test the prediction. Fine, but something that's just thinking, anything that lacks experimental sort of activities won't be considered. So the experimental part is essential here, but philosophy of mind is great, and that could be helpful. Next question here. Will study of animal brain activity be considered? And this is about a project that would be doing experiments similar to those done on human studies. And the answer is yes. So when it comes to experimental research, we're happy with methodologies used in psychology, cognitive science, other areas of neuroscience. And we're also happy with a range of model organisms. It might also be that computational models could be acceptable here if you can justify them. So yeah, animals are fine. Obviously, it needs to go past the correct ethics board and needs to be done with all the right ethical checks and balances. But I assume that goes without saying. Works for human subjects as well. So next question here, would a proposal supporting participatory research be acceptable? I'm not sure about the context here. I'm going to ask the person who wrote that to just maybe give me an example, and then I'll come back to that. Question here on how widely are we defining consciousness? Could it be defined as a sociological phenomenon? That's a good question. Consciousness has a lot of potential definitions. People have been talking about it for a very long time. In this case, I think your proposal would be, would have the best chance if the definition of consciousness is already accepted in some of the consciousness literature. So, literature in sort of neuroscience and psychology and philosophy on the topic. I think that's probably going to put you in the strongest position. I don't know about the definition of consciousness as a sociological phenomenon, so I don't want to comment on that specifically. But what I will say is the definition needs to be something that you can justify in your proposal. The people who review it and who look at it would know about the general consciousness literature, and so it needs to be justified in that context. Something that I would think about is if you want to understand the definition, is what does it say about what is conscious and what isn't conscious? So you want to make sure that it's immune to like absurd counterexamples. But yeah, it's up to you to justify that. If a proposal is anonymized and decoupled from previous work and experience, how are you going to assess the feasibility of the project? That's another good question. It's one that we discussed a lot when we thought about this anonymizing step. And it's kind of a challenge that just exists in this field of having to judge the quality of proposals. So in this case, we are not asking reviewers to judge feasibility based on who is involved. We will ask them to judge feasibility based on their knowledge of the methodologies. And so if you're using a methodology that nobody's ever heard of and it's insanely complex, they might not think it's so feasible. If you're citing a methodology that has been used, has been demonstrated in the literature, then probably based on that, it would be considered feasible, without having without them even having to know who's going to conduct the experiment. Obviously, we will look at who the applicants are, and we can't give research funding to individuals. If you're not at an institution, we can't give you a grant. Also, if you're not at a research institution, then we wouldn't be able to give you funding. So just based on the check that we are expecting proposals from research institutions, we would make a feasibility judgment based on that. Next question here, does the time that team members spent on the project always need to be budgeted and paid for by the foundation, or can they decide, for example, to provide advice, etc., for free? Another excellent question, and the answer is they can provide advice for free. The best way to structure that is to add their time as an in-kind contribution. So where I showed in the budget, there's the amounts requested from us, and then the co-funding. You could list them as co-funding in kind, and that would basically mean they're just contributing something with monetary value by doing work for free. So that's that's one way of describing the roles of collaborators who won't be asking for money. and related question here is, can it be considered additional funding? The answer is yes. That would be additional funding, and we specifically we think of it as in-kind additional funding. So it's valued as additional funding, but we don't need to literally see money come in for it. Question here about a letter from the Office of Sponsored Programs. If you have one, can you upload it? The answer is yes, you can. It might be nice to just have it in our records, so that if this proposal goes ahead, that it's in there. It's easier to deal with the paperwork. So yes, you can upload it. You certainly wouldn't get any kind of penalty for doing it, but just it's not necessary. And if it takes you more than 10 or 12 days to do it, then you don't have to stress about what the OSP will say. There's some good questions here, by the way. I'm enjoying this conversation. Clearly, many of you have thought carefully about these proposals, and it's exciting to see so many people working on this. I had a quick look the other day in the sort of some of the draft things that came in, and it's just cool to see some kind of like innovative, creative ideas coming in there. So yeah, very excited about this. Next question here: can an individual be a participant of more than one proposal? The answer is yes, with the caveat that you've got to think about your time, and we're going to think about your time. So if you're part of so many proposals that there's not enough time in the world for anyone to do them all, that would affect how we judge the feasibility. But we don't have restrictions against being part of more than one proposal. And again, we hope that would let people feel free to collaborate or get creative. Next question here: what are the criteria for initial selection before the peer review? Is the previous experience of an applicant a criteria? So the initial selection criteria is what I showed in my presentation earlier. If you haven't seen that, go on our website, because on the website there is also a separate page that covers a lot of this criteria. The answer is previous experience is a criteria in the sense that you need some convincing experience, right? So you need to be a researcher, but it isn't something that we use to compare proposals. So whether you're at Harvard or whether you're at another institution that I haven't heard of doesn't matter in this case. It's the quality of the project description that we care about the most. Can I say how many applications I expect to receive? I don't know. I looked a couple of weeks ago and I don't remember how many I had there. What I will say is we have a capacity, sort of a general expectation, probably for about 50 or so to go for external review. So in that case, it's not like it's 500 is what I'll say. So it's probably more on the sort of like 50 to 100 amount rather than 100 plus. Question here on TWCF open access guidelines. They strongly advise against publishing in journals that don't index in DOAJ. So the requirement on indexing is not something that we enforce that strictly right now. It's something that we advise, really just to promote open access publishing. So if that's where you plan to publish, you could probably kind of do that, providing that you satisfy the other publication requirements. So TWCF requires all publications that we fund to be open access. There's a number of ways you can do that. So you can publish in any journal and then upload the author accepted manuscript in a repository. That's okay. Or it might be that there's an open access journal that's not a hybrid journal that asks for an APC, an article processing charge. Providing that's reasonable, you can include that in your application amount. Sometimes we can also add that on top. But it is very important for us that the research we fund ends up being accessible to everybody in a way that's open. So we try and give people as many options as possible to accomplish that. But it is very important to us. This here about indexing is it's recommendation, but we're not going to sort of accept or decline a proposal based on information on this topic. Another question here on how many proposals. So I won't say that again. Coming back here, question coming back to a comment about clinical research needing a theoretical component. So if the clinical research leads to a better understanding of the physiology of consciousness, would that be acceptable? The answer is yes. If you can argue in your proposal why that's the case, fine. And obviously you would need to also state your definition of consciousness and justify that, but that's an acceptable way to do it. Next question here, would it in terms of anonymity be acceptable to state that a highly regarded expert on method X is involved in the project? Yes, you can do that. To be honest, I'm not sure how. I'm not sure whether a reviewer would interpret that as necessarily changing their opinion of the proposal, because we instruct them to basically look at the quality of the project description and other information written on it. So if your project description demonstrates that you know how this methodology works, great. If you just say that we have a highly regarded expert on that, that's fine. But if you don't also demonstrate that you know how the methodology works, then you might still be on the back foot in that sense. Question here about whether an organization can be a small company. That's definitely more complicated. So being a small company doesn't mean you're automatically excluded, but we will have to go and do extra due diligence because I would have to convince our compliance people and our trustees that this organization really can pull off this kind of research. So if you're a small company with an excellent track record, you do this kind of thing all the time, fine. If you're a small company that doesn't normally do research, it will be much more difficult, unfortunately. Question on how many proposals can be funded? Up to 15 is the answer. And what seems like the last question so far, would it be acceptable to say that named expert X with respect to method Y is involved in the project? If you're going to name the experts, then that's probably going against the anonymous rule. So I think if you cite someone's literature to show that you know how this work is done, I'd say that's more important than sort of. I mean, what we're trying to discourage people from doing is name dropping an expert, which and as we instruct the reviewers, a lot of people are trying to do that kind of thing, and it sometimes doesn't necessarily mean that much because you don't really know how, to what extent the expert will be involved. Because then you go and look at, you have to go and look at letters of support and things like that. Whereas actually, unless if it's an incredibly complicated procedure, it, we think it's a better thing for people to just look at the quality of the experimental design and know that it's one that's realistic. If your process is so complicated that there's only like one person in the world who can do it, fine. Then maybe you want to say, okay, there's just one person who can do it, and we've got them. I still think if you choose that kind of methodology, you might still be at a bit of a disadvantage, because if it's so complicated that just one person can do it, and you're up against simpler methodologies that ask equally interesting questions, I think the reviewers might, base their judgment more on the the likelihood that this methodology is feasible, rather than the name of the expert involved. So we've gone through 41 questions. That was fun and really interesting questions. Thank you so much for asking these. Really great to hear from you all. I don't see any other questions coming in. We've got 7 minutes, so why not just give the time back to you. Question here: is there a place to put additional notes and comments on the application? I don't think there is, unless if Virginia knows of a place to add additional comments and notes. I don't think there is. I think there is like an executive summary that we could look at, but we kind of hope that anything that's relevant, would have a home in the application. So yeah, just thank you to all of you for attending. I really look forward to reading all your proposals and ideas, and hopefully, we'll be in touch soon with our feedback. So thanks again, and best of luck with your applications.